Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Atlanta winters don't usually scare anyone. The cold is polite, more suggestion than threat. But that New Year's Eve, the air had teeth. The kind of cold that slips under your jacket and makes you move faster without realizing why. People sprinted from parked cars to front doors, laughter cutting through their breath like smoke. I arrived just before sunset. 5 hours on to my 75 from Nashville had left me stiff and buzzing with caffeine. Podcasts faded in and out of my mind as city lights replaced pine trees. I told myself this trip mattered. That saying yes mattered. The invitation came from Marisol, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. She lived near Grant Park in one of those massive Victorian houses Atlanta hides behind quiet streets. The kind with wraparound porches, ornate railings, and windows that watched you arrive. 6 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, a basement turned into a game lounge with a pool table and dusty arcade machines that still hummed like ghosts when powered on. My 10-year high school reunion months earlier had exposed something uncomfortable. I had disappeared from my own life. Remote work, long stretches without conversation, days measured in emails instead of voices. When Marisol promised this New Year's party would be unforgettable, the word felt like oxygen. I pulled up around 7 p.m. on December 31st, 2024. The house was already alive. Warm light spilled from every window. Someone was stringing white lights across the porch. Music thumped faintly from inside. Coolers lined the hallway like soldiers waiting for inspection. By 10, the place was overflowing. 70, maybe 80 people. Yoga studio friends, roommates, co-workers, friends of friends of friends. The guest list became an organism, breathing, shifting, impossible to track. I parked myself near the kitchen island with a whiskey and started talking to a guy named Caleb, who worked in city zoning and laughed like nothing bad had ever happened to him. That laugh pulled people in. Strangers introduced themselves easily. The kind of friendliness that only exists when everyone's waiting for midnight. For the first time in months, I felt light. Like the drive had been exactly right. The house breathed with us, windows fogged, heat pushed back the cold outside. If walls could absorb joy, this one was full. I didn't know that in less than 3 hours, I'd be face down on that same kitchen floor, concrete still, with a gun pressed into my skull. Around 11 o'clock, I noticed people I hadn't seen earlier. 6 of them. 4 men. 2 women. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dressed well enough to blend in, but something about them felt contained. Tight, like coiled wire. One man stood out, black fitted jacket, shaved head, a geometric tattoo climbing the side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar like it didn't want to be seen. His eyes moved constantly, not curious, not drunk, measuring, counting. His friends laughed, grabbed drinks, played their part, but his gaze never softened. I told myself not to be dramatic. Big party. New faces constantly arriving. Caleb drifted off. I poured another drink. The group split up. 2 headed downstairs. 2 disappeared toward the bedrooms. The last pair stayed near the front door. Later, I'd understand. At the time, I thought they were just exploring. At 11:58, the DJ cut the music. Everyone surged into the main living room. Plastic cups raised, champagne uncorked. Marisol climbed onto a chair, flushed and glowing, leading the countdown like a conductor. I ended up wedged between Caleb and a woman named Renee, an elementary school teacher wearing a crooked silver tiara. The room vibrated. 10, 9, 8. That fragile hope crept in, the lie we all believe that time resets us. 0. Confetti burst. People screamed, hugged, kissed strangers. Champagne tasted like forgiveness, like new beginnings. Somewhere in that noise, the back door locked. Weapons slid free from jackets. The first scream came from the basement around 12:15. Most people laughed it off. Music kept pounding. I wandered back to the kitchen for water, head swimming. That's when the man with the neck tattoo walked in. He held a pistol like it weighed nothing. Behind him, one of the women carried a short shotgun low against her hip. He didn't shout. He pointed the gun at me and said calmly, "Get on the floor, face down, hands behind your head." No tremor, no rush, scripted. My knees hit tile so hard stars flashed. 3 others dropped beside me. Someone sobbed quietly. Someone whispered, "Is this a joke?" Zip ties cinched tight around my wrists, too tight. Pulse pounding in my fingers. Then the screaming spread. Furniture crashing, commands shouted, glass breaking, heavy boots on old hardwood, cheek against cold tile. Smelling spilled beer, I watched boots pass back and forth, heard fragments of terror. A grown man sobbing, someone retching, a mirror shattering. The man crouched beside me, pressed the gun into the base of my skull. "Where's the safe?" I told him I didn't live there, that I didn't know. The barrel ground harder. His breath smelled like cigarettes and sweet punch. Then he laughed, soft, humorless, and told me not to worry about my friends. Told me to worry about keeping my fingers. That detail froze me. These weren't amateurs. They'd planned this. The woman dumped wallets and phones into a duffel bag with mechanical focus. Jewelry, laptops, everything. Eventually, they herded us into the main living room. 60 people, sitting against walls, glass cutting into skin. DJ equipment overturned like a corpse. I saw Marisol, mascara streaked, a bruise blooming under her eye. Our eyes locked. She mouthed something. I nodded. I was alive. That was all I could offer. Someone had called 911. I learned later it was Darren, hiding in the basement bathroom, whispering the address with his screen dimmed. New Year's Eve stretched police thin. Help was coming. Eventually, the robbers found him. They dragged him upstairs, beat him until faces turned away and people vomited. The message was clear. Don't be brave. At 1:47 a.m., sirens howled. Everything shifted. The leader paced, checked a stolen watch, spoke urgently. Time had run out. He made a decision. They grabbed Marisol. They grabbed Renee. They grabbed another man. Insurance. I screamed Marisol's name until my throat tore. She looked back once. Then they were gone. Police lights flooded the street minutes later. The hostages were found 2 hours later in a stolen van behind a strip mall. Alive. The robbers vanished. Some were caught weeks later. Not him. Not the man with the tattoo. I drove back to Nashville 4 days later. Didn't leave my apartment for a month. I still flinch at fireworks. Some wounds don't heal. They integrate. My girlfriend Lauren and I had been together for almost 3 years when New Year's Eve of 2017 arrived. Long enough to know each other's habits. Long enough to know when the other was pretending to be okay. We were living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Boise, Idaho. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's TVs through the walls and the heat barely kept up once winter settled in. We both worked jobs that paid just enough to survive, not enough to feel secure. Lauren was a veterinary technician at a small animal clinic near the mall. I worked IT support for a regional insurance company, a job I'd taken after quietly giving up on finishing my college degree. That December had wrung us dry. Long shifts, short tempers, bills stacked on the counter like accusations, the kind of exhaustion that makes celebration feel fake. When Lauren suggested skipping downtown entirely and finding somewhere quiet to watch the fireworks, just the two of us, it felt like relief instead of compromise. Neither of us liked packed bars or freezing among strangers who drank too much and listened too little. We wanted silence, distance, something that belonged only to us. I had no idea how badly I was misreading that instinct. I told her about a place I'd heard of through a coworker, an overlook called Ridgeline Point, about 40 minutes outside the city. A narrow mountain road led up to it, ending in a small gravel lot that looked out over the valley. He'd mentioned taking his wife there when they were younger, back when life felt lighter. The drive up started just after dark. My old Ford Ranger hummed steadily as we left the city behind. Lauren queued up an acoustic playlist on her phone, soft guitar and low voices filling the cab. We passed the last gas station around 9 p.m., its fluorescent lights buzzing like insects, and after that, there was nothing but trees. Tall pines pressed in on both sides of the road. Occasional reflective signs warned about deer crossings. No houses, no traffic. The temperature dropped hard as we climbed. By the time we reached the final stretch, it was around 18 degrees, frost glazing the guardrails and glittering faintly under the headlights. When we pulled into the gravel lot at Ridgeline Point, we were completely alone. The city spread out below us, lights scattered like spilled embers. Above us, the sky was painfully clear, packed with stars you never see when streetlights steal the darkness. Lauren squeezed my hand and said this was exactly what she needed. I shut off the engine. We sat there in the quiet, wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot chocolate from a thermos. She'd even brought those little hand warmers you crack and shake, the kind that smell faintly of metal and warmth. For the first 20 minutes, everything was perfect. We talked about the year behind us, about moving into a better apartment in spring, about her sister's wedding and whether we could afford the trip. Our breath fogged the windows, and every so often I wiped a clear circle to check the view. It was around 11:15 when I noticed the light. Small, pale, flickering near the tree line to our left. At first I thought it was a reflection, city lights bouncing off something metallic. But then it moved, just a few inches, slow and controlled. Lauren was mid-sentence when she noticed me staring and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought I saw something, probably an animal. She leaned closer to the glass. The light vanished. We sat in silence, both of us scanning the dark edge of the forest. Lauren laughed softly and said it was probably a hiker with a headlamp. Someone else avoiding the crowds. It made sense. It was New Year's Eve. But something about the way the light had moved, deliberate, patient, made the back of my neck prickle. I told myself I was being paranoid. 5 minutes later, it appeared again. Closer. Not much. Maybe 30 feet closer than before. This time, it stayed on long enough for me to understand what I was seeing. It wasn't a headlamp. It was a phone screen, held low, illuminating the bottom half of a face. Someone was standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. Lauren saw it at the same moment I did. Her nails dug into my arm through my jacket. Neither of us spoke. The figure didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there, half hidden by a massive pine, shoulders broad beneath a dark jacket. Then the light clicked off. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. Lauren whispered that we should leave. I agreed instantly. I reached for the keys and turned the ignition. The engine coughed weakly, a sound I'd never heard from it before, and died. I tried again. Nothing. Dashboard lights flickered once, then went black. Lauren asked what was happening. I told her I didn't know. I pumped the gas and turned the key again. Just a hollow click. The truck was dead. I want to be clear. That truck was old, but it wasn't failing. I'd replaced the battery 2 months earlier. It had started perfectly when we left. There was no warning, no slow crank. 1 second it worked. The next, it didn't. Like something had been shut off. Lauren's breathing sped up. Her eyes stayed fixed on the trees. I said I'd pop the hood, check the battery. When I reached for the door handle, she grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she said. "Please don't get out." She pointed. The figure had moved. It wasn't at the tree line anymore. It stood in the middle of the gravel lot, maybe 40 feet from our bumper, completely still. No phone light now, just a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the valley. Watching. There was something wrong about the stillness, not hesitation. Patience. Lauren tried to call 911. No signal. I tried my phone. Same thing. We were completely cut off. The figure didn't speak, didn't advance, and somehow that was worse. It felt like a calculation, like waiting for the exact right moment. Then it took a step forward. Slow. Casual. I leaned on the horn. Nothing. Whatever had killed the battery had killed everything. Lauren cried quietly. I reached under my seat and found a tire iron, the cold metal grounding me just enough to function. I told her if it came closer, I'd fight. The figure was 20 feet away now, close enough to see more detail. A man. Tall. Work boots. Canvas jacket. Hands empty at his sides. 10 feet from the hood, headlights swept across the lot. A Jeep Wrangler rolled in. For a split second, the man was fully illuminated. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, eyes reflecting light like an animal caught on the road. Then he turned, walked back into the trees, unhurried. Gone. The Jeep pulled beside us. A woman in her 50s rolled down the window, concern etched into her face. She asked if we were okay. Said she'd seen someone walking away from our truck. I've never been so relieved to see another human being. She told us to get in her Jeep immediately, locked the doors once we were inside, and drove us down the mountain without wasting time. As we pulled away, I looked back. At the edge of the tree line, just for a moment, I saw him again. Watching. Police later found our battery cables cut clean through. Bolt cutters. He had been there before we ever noticed him. Waiting. They never found him. Months later, detectives told us about an abandoned campsite nearby. A tent, canned food, zip ties, a hunting knife, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for us. Some nights I still think about how calm he was, how close we came. Some things don't fade. They just become part of you. New Year's Eve. 2023 is not a memory I revisit by choice. It comes back on its own. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth. Sometimes when I unlock my front door. Sometimes when I hear footsteps in a hallway that sound a little too close. I had moved into my apartment complex in Atlanta just 3 months earlier. One of those massive modern developments built fast and cheap, where every building is a clone of the next. Same brick exterior, same gray doors, same sterile lighting that makes every hallway feel like a hospital wing after midnight. My unit was 4B, 4th floor, second door on the left after the elevator. I thought I knew it by muscle memory. That night, co-workers from the warehouse invited me to a New Year's party in Midtown. I didn't know the host well, but I went anyway. My family was back in Virginia, and I didn't want to spend another holiday alone staring at a countdown on TV. I had a few beers at home while getting ready. Nothing crazy. Enough to feel loose. Enough to feel social. I took an Uber around 9 p.m. By the time midnight arrived, the party was chaos. Loud music, bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, drinks being poured without measuring anything. Every time I tried to keep count, someone handed me another glass. When midnight hit, people screamed, hugged, kissed strangers. Someone popped a bottle near my ear and laughed when I flinched. I remember thinking I should slow down. I didn't. I left around 2 a.m., maybe closer to 2:30. My phone battery was nearly dead, just enough juice to call an Uber home. The ride back was a blur of red lights and half-remembered conversation. I leaned my head against the window and watched the city slide past, feeling that heavy drunk exhaustion, where your body just wants gravity to win. The Uber stopped. I got out. Everything looked right. The entrance, the lobby, the tile floors, the mailboxes mounted on the wall, the elevator with scratched stainless steel doors. Nothing triggered alarm bells. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the 4th floor, then leaned against the wall while the elevator hummed upward. My eyes closed for a second too long. When the doors opened, I stepped out and turned left, exactly like I always did. I counted the doors. 1, 2, 4B. I pulled out my keys and pushed one into the lock. It didn't turn. Drunk logic kicked in. You're just clumsy. I tried again. Wiggled it. Pressed the door slightly. Click. The door opened. I walked inside without a second thought. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't my apartment. Mine smelled like cheap dollar store air freshener, fake ocean breeze and plastic. This place smelled like stale cigarettes and old cooking oil. But my brain brushed it off. I assumed I'd left food out or spilled something earlier. The layout was identical. Small entryway. Living room straight ahead. Kitchen to the right. Hallway to the left, leading to the bedroom. I didn't turn on the lights. I never do when I come home late. I navigate by the glow from the parking lot, lights filtering through the windows. I kicked off my shoes near the door and started toward what I believed was my bedroom. The furniture placement was wrong. I slammed my shin into a coffee table that absolutely did not belong there and cursed under my breath. Pain shot up my leg. Still, it didn't click. I was too drunk, too tired, too focused on collapsing into bed. I made it halfway down the hallway when I heard movement, a soft shuffle, then a door opening. I stopped. Not because I was scared, because I was confused. I lived alone. Before I could process that thought, a light flicked on. I was staring at a man I had never seen before. He stood in the doorway of a bedroom, wearing boxer shorts and a white tank top, gripping a baseball bat with both hands. The bat was raised. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, wild, pure fear, pure rage. He screamed at me. Words blurred together, something about getting out, asking who the hell I was. That was the moment reality hit. I wasn't in my apartment. I was inside a stranger's home, and he thought I was there to hurt him. I raised my hands instantly, palms out, trying to calm him. I started apologizing, explaining that I thought this was my apartment, that I lived in 4B. The words came out slurred, useless. He didn't hear me. He kept screaming, backing me toward the wall, the bat never dropping even an inch. His arms shook, not from weakness, but from adrenaline. Behind him, a woman appeared in the hallway, older than me. Panic etched into her face. She screamed too, asking who I was, telling him to call the police. The noise was overwhelming. My head pounded. Alcohol and fear collided inside my skull. I tried to step backward. My foot caught on something. Maybe a shoe, maybe a rug. I stumbled. That tiny loss of balance nearly killed me. The man swung. I don't think he meant to kill me. But fear doesn't calculate consequences. The bat came down hard. I twisted at the last second, and it slammed into my left shoulder instead of my head. The pain was instant and blinding, like my entire arm had been set on fire. I hit the floor face first. Hard wood cracked against my cheek. Blood filled my mouth. I screamed. The woman screamed louder. I curled up, clutching my shoulder, begging him to stop. Over and over, I told him it was a mistake, that I was drunk, that I got the wrong apartment. He stood over me with the bat raised again. I truly believed I was about to die. I looked up at his face and saw something terrifying. Not cruelty, not evil. Confusion. He didn't know what to do next. We were both trapped in the same nightmare. The woman grabbed his arm and yanked it down, screaming at him to stop, that she had already called 911. I stayed on the floor, shaking, crying like a child. Pain pulsed through my shoulder with every heartbeat. The man stepped back, still gripping the bat, breathing like he'd just run a mile. Sirens grew louder. Relief and dread tangled together in my chest. Police meant safety, but they also meant consequences. They arrived fast. Commands were shouted, guns drawn. I kept my hands visible, terrified of making things worse. They handcuffed me first. The cuffs dug into my shoulder, and I nearly blacked out. Questions flew. The couple talked over each other. I tried to explain, but my words came out broken and drunk. One officer checked my ID and asked for my address. When I told him, his expression changed. He asked if I knew where I was. I said 4B. He shook his head. I was in Building C, not Building B. Same floor, same apartment number, different building. The complex had 4 identical buildings arranged around a parking lot. The Uber driver had dropped me at the wrong entrance, and I never noticed. I walked into the wrong building, the wrong floor, the wrong door, and it was unlocked. The man who hit me sat on the couch, face buried in his hands, shoulders shaking. He thought he was defending his home. The paramedics said my shoulder wasn't broken, just badly bruised. The police didn't charge me. The couple didn't press charges. None of that made it feel better. An officer walked me outside and pointed across the lot. My building, 50 feet away. That was the distance between my bed and almost dying. I moved out 2 months later. I don't drink like that anymore. I check door numbers twice. Some mistakes don't need monsters. Just timing. Just fear. Just one unlocked door. If someone had told me that my first morning of a brand new year would involve hiding behind a locked door, holding my breath, while a stranger roamed freely through my apartment, I would have laughed and called them dramatic. Back then, New Year's felt like a reset button, a clean page, a promise that whatever happened before midnight didn't matter anymore. I was wrong. Some nights don't end when the clock hits 12. Some nights follow you into the morning and stay with you for years. Let me start from the beginning. December 31st, 2017 felt like a victory lap. I had graduated college that spring and landed my first real job at an insurance firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough that I could finally afford a decent apartment without counting every dollar. I shared a 2-bedroom unit with my roommate Trisha, someone I'd known since sophomore year. We were opposites in the best way. She was blunt, confident, the kind of person who never hesitated to speak up, while I was cautious, polite to a fault, always worried about making things awkward. Our apartment sat on the 4th floor of a mid-rise building near the city center. Exposed brick on the outside, beige carpet inside, thin walls that let you hear footsteps from the unit above. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. We had spent months slowly making it feel like home. Throw pillows on the couch, mismatched mugs in the cabinet, candles that made the place smell like vanilla and warm spice. That night, we'd been invited to a massive New Year's party at a coworker's house. The kind of party that spills into the backyard, where strangers introduce themselves like they've known you for years, where time blurs and you stop checking your phone because it doesn't matter anymore. By the time we realized how late it was nearly 2 in the morning. A smaller group of us, me, Trisha, and 2 friends, Andy and Simone, decided to keep the night going back at our place. It seemed harmless. We were still buzzing, still laughing, still riding that end-of-year high. That decision is the one I replay in my head the most. We got home around 2:40 a.m., shoes kicked off by the door, music turned on low. Champagne popped open again. The city outside was quiet in that eerie post-celebration way, when the fireworks are over and everyone's either passed out or heading home. About 40 minutes later, the stranger arrived. Andy mentioned he had run into a guy he vaguely knew from a flag football league years ago. Someone named Wallace. I never found out exactly how the invitation happened. One moment we were laughing on the couch. The next moment our door was opening, and there he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a half-empty bottle of whiskey like he belonged there. He didn't say hello. Instead, he stepped inside, inhaled deeply, and commented on how our apartment smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. He said it reminded him of his grandmother's house before she died. The words landed wrong, too personal, too intimate for someone I'd never met. I forced a smile. Trisha caught my eye immediately. I could tell she felt it too. That small tightening in the chest, that instinctive discomfort you can't logically explain. Wallace was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a shaved head and pale gray eyes that seemed to linger just a second longer than normal. When he smiled, it felt practiced, like something he'd learned how to do. At first, Wallace was just uncomfortable. He laughed too loudly at jokes no one had finished telling. He interrupted conversations to talk about himself. He refilled his glass without asking. His stories never quite lined up. One minute he worked in pharmaceutical sales. The next, he was between jobs. Then suddenly, he was talking about a lawsuit against a former employer. What bothered me more was how he moved through our apartment. He opened our refrigerator like it was his own, commented on leftovers, picked up framed photos from our shelves, and studied them too closely. When he wandered down the hallway toward the bedrooms, my stomach dropped. I called out that the bathroom was the other direction. He came back smiling. No apology, just acknowledgement. By 3:30 a.m., Simone was asleep on the loveseat. Andy had collapsed onto the floor, with a pillow under his head. Trisha and I exchanged looks across the room, silent communication perfected over years of friendship. We were done. I stretched and yawned dramatically, hoping Wallace would take the hint. Instead, he kicked off his shoes, revealing mismatched socks, and settled deeper into the armchair like he'd just decided this was where he lived now. I mentioned how late it was. Wallace nodded slowly, eyes fixed on a dark television screen, and said he wasn't tired. Said he was a night owl. Said he'd just hang out a little longer. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Trisha finally stood up and said it was time to call it a night. She offered to call a ride for anyone who needed one. Andy mumbled that he'd crash on the couch. Fine. Wallace didn't move. He tilted his head and said he didn't have anywhere to go. Claimed his roommate had changed the locks while he was out. Said he couldn't get back in until morning. The story felt rehearsed, too smooth, like he'd used it before. Trisha asked if he had friends, family. He shook his head slowly, then looked at us with something that almost resembled pity. He said he'd sleep in the chair, that we wouldn't even know he was there. His voice dropped low and calm. That scared me more than yelling ever could have. We pulled into the kitchen to whisper. Calling the police felt extreme. He hadn't technically done anything wrong. We decided to lock ourselves in Trisha's room, mine didn't have a lock, and deal with it in the morning. When we walked back into the living room, Wallace was gone. He was standing in the hallway, perfectly still, facing our bedroom doors. I asked what he was doing. He turned slowly, face blank for a split second before smiling again. Said he was looking for the bathroom. The bathroom door was open. Light on. He'd walked right past it. Trisha told him firmly to stay in the living room. He raised his hands and walked back slowly, forcing us to step aside as he passed. As he brushed by me, I caught a smell I hadn't noticed before. Sour, metallic, layered beneath whiskey. That was the moment fear fully set in. We barricaded Trisha's door with her dresser, sat on the bed with our phones in our hands, listened. We heard him moving around, cabinets opening, the refrigerator, the click of door handles. First the bathroom, then my bedroom. Each sound felt deliberate, calculated. Sometime around 5, everything went silent. Silence is worse than noise. Silence lets your imagination fill the gaps. We must have dozed off because sunlight woke me. It was nearly 8. We cracked the door open and heard voices. Wallace was in our kitchen, eating cereal. Our cereal, scrolling his phone, like he lived there. That was it. I opened the front door and told him to leave. Andy backed me up. Wallace stared at us for a long moment, then stood, leaned close enough for me to smell that sour scent again, and whispered that he'd had a nice time. Then he left. We changed the locks the next day, found drawers opened, jewelry moved, nothing stolen, which somehow made it worse. I moved out months later. I still trust my instincts now, because sometimes the real horror isn't monsters or ghosts. It's realizing how easily a stranger can cross the line and how dangerous politeness can be. If anyone had told me that New Year's Eve would end with me sitting in a dark living room, gripping a baseball bat while listening to someone drag their fingers along the outside of my house, I would have brushed it off as paranoia. Back then, New Year's meant noise, laughter, cheap alcohol, and the comfort of familiar faces. It meant safety. It meant routine. What happened that night taught me how fragile that illusion really is. December 31st felt unusually calm. I lived in a small ranch-style house at the end of a cul-de-sac just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. It was the kind of neighborhood real estate agents describe as peaceful. Lawns trimmed short, porch lights glowing warm after sunset, cars parked neatly in driveways, mostly older couples, a few young families. People waved, but nobody really talked. Everyone stayed in their own lane. I liked it that way. I wasn't planning anything wild that year. No packed bars, no downtown chaos. Just a few friends, frozen pizzas, and champagne that barely qualified as champagne. Around 9 p.m., Colin showed up with his girlfriend Whitney, both of them already laughing, arms full of groceries like they were arriving for Thanksgiving instead of New Year's Eve. Not long after, my neighbor Frank came by. He lived 2 doors down and had separated from his wife a couple of months earlier. He admitted he didn't want to be alone that night, and I didn't blame him. I would have invited him even if he hadn't asked. That was it. 4 of us total. Music played softly in the background. We joked, ate pizza straight from the box, and talked about nothing important. The volume went up during a few songs, but never enough to bother anyone. I had done this exact same thing the year before. No complaints, no issues, nothing out of the ordinary. Until the knock. It was firm. 3 sharp knocks on the front door. Not frantic, not angry, just deliberate. Everyone stopped talking at the same time. I checked my phone without really knowing why. 11:47 p.m. I remember it clearly because I was about to text my mom, Happy New Year early, knowing she'd already be asleep. Colin muted the music. Frank joked about it being the police. We laughed, because it felt ridiculous. I got up and walked to the door. Through the narrow window beside it, I saw a man standing on my porch. Mid-40s maybe. Dark jacket, jeans, hands clasped calmly in front of him like he was waiting for a bus. I opened the door halfway and kept the chain on. I didn't consciously decide to do it. My body just did it for me. He smiled, said he was responding to a noise complaint. His voice was calm. Too calm. I asked who had complained. He said it was anonymous, claimed he couldn't share details. I noticed immediately what he didn't have. No uniform, no badge, no clipboard, nothing official. I asked him directly if he was police. There was a pause, barely a second, but it was there. He said he was with the neighborhood association. That didn't sit right with me. I had lived in that house for almost 3 years. There was no HOA, no association, no community board, nothing. I told him we'd keep it down and started to close the door. That's when he put his hand on the door frame. Not aggressively, just enough to stop the door from moving. He said he needed to come inside to verify the noise level, claimed it was standard procedure. Before I could respond, Colin stepped up behind me. Colin is a big guy, broad shoulders, athletic build, the kind of presence that fills a doorway. I felt the shift immediately. So did the man. He took a small step back, eyes flicking between Colin and me. I told him again that we'd keep it down and that he wasn't coming inside. He smiled. But it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're thinking instead of listening. He said fine, said he'd check back later. Then he turned and walked away. I locked the door immediately. Colin asked what that was about. I told him I didn't know, but my skin felt tight, like something was wrong. Whitney asked if everything was okay. I said yes. Then I walked to the front window. The man wasn't leaving. He walked to the end of my driveway and stopped. Just stood there, looking back at the house. Frank joined me, said he didn't recognize the guy, and Frank knew most people on the street, at least by sight. We watched him for nearly 2 minutes. 2 minutes doesn't sound long, until someone is standing at the edge of your property, staring into your house in the dark. Finally, he turned and walked down the sidewalk, disappearing around the curve of the cul-de-sac where the streetlight didn't reach. Colin suggested calling the police. I hesitated. What would I say? Some guy knocked on my door and stood in my driveway? It sounded stupid even to me. We locked every door and checked every window anyway. The mood never came back. Music stayed low. Conversations died out. Frank kept glancing toward the windows. Whitney stayed glued to her phone. Colin sat stiff on the couch, arms crossed. When I checked my phone again, it was 12:03 a.m. We had missed midnight completely. That bothered me more than it should have. Like the night had been hijacked. Like something had slipped past us while we weren't paying attention. Around 12:15, Colin said he needed air. I told him I'd go with him. We stepped out onto the small patio behind my kitchen. The air was cold, but manageable. Fireworks popped faintly in the distance. Somewhere far away, people were cheering. Colin asked if I recognized the guy. From work? From anywhere? I told him no. Then Colin stopped talking. He was staring past me, toward the back corner of the yard. I turned slowly. There was a figure standing just beyond the fence line. The same man. Motionless. Watching. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. Colin grabbed my arm and pulled me inside. We locked the door and engaged the deadbolt. Frank said we needed to call the police. This time, I didn't argue. The dispatcher said officers would come, but New Year's Eve was busy. Drunk drivers, domestic calls, fireworks complaints. We turned off all the lights. The house felt hollow. I checked the backyard window again. The man was gone, which somehow made it worse. Then came the sound, a slow scraping noise, moving along the side of the house, like fingers dragging across the siding. Slow, intentional. Then 3 knocks on the back door. Calm, patient. Through the small window, I saw a face pressed close to the glass. I heard his voice. He said he just wanted to talk. Said he knew there was a woman inside. That's when everything broke. Colin screamed, threatened him. The man ran. Police arrived too late. They found nothing. No footprints. No sign. He vanished. I never saw him again. But every New Year's Eve since then, I leave town. Because some doors, once knocked on, never really close. Fireworks had been echoing across the city since early evening, the sharp cracks and distant booms bouncing between buildings, like thunder that refused to fade. By the time the noise finally slowed to scattered pops, my phone screen glowed 1:47 a.m., January 1st, 2024. A new year. But nothing about that night felt fresh or hopeful. I was 24, barely a month into my new life in Austin, Texas, still learning which streets felt familiar and which ones felt like they didn't quite belong to me yet. I had moved here for a nursing position at a small outpatient clinic near the University District. It was my first real job after finishing my program, my first time living somewhere without family close by, and my first New Year's Eve completely on my own. My roommate, Maribel, had gone to stay with her boyfriend for the holiday. That meant when I got home, our duplex on Maplewood Lane would be dark and empty. I knew that before I even left the party, and I told myself I was fine with it. I wanted to believe I was the kind of person who didn't get spooked by an empty house. The party itself had been small, A coworker named Jocelyn hosted it, someone I'd grown friendly with over the last few months. There was music, cheap champagne, too much laughter, and that restless energy people get when they want the new year to mean something more than the last one did. I could have called a ride share. I should have. But the night air felt cool and clean after hours inside a warm, crowded living room, and my place was barely a mile and a half away. I decided to walk. At first, everything felt normal. The streets were still busy with people heading home from their own celebrations. I passed couples holding hands, friends shouting half-drunk goodbyes, someone setting off one last illegal firework in the middle of the road. Porch lights glowed softly, and music drifted out of open windows. For the first 10 minutes, I felt silly for even considering a ride. Then the crowds thinned. Street lights grew farther apart, shadows stretching longer across the sidewalks. The laughter faded, replaced by the soft hum of distant traffic and the steady click of my heels against the pavement. Somewhere around Oleander Drive, I became aware of footsteps behind me. Not loud, not rushed, just there. About 50 feet back, keeping pace. I told myself it meant nothing. People were walking home all over the neighborhood. Still, I glanced over my shoulder. I caught a glimpse of someone in dark clothing, hands tucked into their jacket pockets, head slightly lowered. A man, I thought. But I couldn't be sure from the distance. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I simply walked a little faster. By the time I turned onto Maplewood Lane, my heart was beating harder than it should have been. The footsteps had faded, or maybe I'd stopped listening for them over the sound of my own breathing. The cul-de-sac looked quiet, familiar. Most of the houses were dark. Televisions flickered blue behind curtains. My duplex sat near the end of the street. The porch light was on, just like I always left it. A small ceramic frog sat beside the welcome mat, something Maribel had found at a flea market and insisted gave the place character. I fumbled with my keys, hands colder than I realized. The lock clicked open. I stepped inside, shut the door, and slid the deadbolt into place. For a long moment, I just stood there in the dark entryway, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. I told myself I was overreacting. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter, poured a glass of water, and checked my phone. Messages from friends. Photos from parties still going strong. Normal, safe things. The world hadn't changed just because the year had. I decided to take a shower. I wanted to wash off the smell of smoke and beer, to reset before going to bed. The bathroom was at the back of the duplex, small and narrow. A frosted window sat above the tub, facing the thin strip of yard between our place and the wooden fence, separating us from the neighbors. I had never worried about that window before. It was frosted. You couldn't see anything through it. I turned on the water, waited for it to heat, and stepped under the spray. The hot water felt incredible. I closed my eyes, letting the steam fill the room, my muscles slowly relaxing. I don't know how long I stood there before I heard it. A soft sound, barely noticeable, like fabric brushing against the outside wall. I turned off the water immediately. Silence. Then it happened again. A faint scraping sound, subtle, deliberate. I knew that sound. The ground outside that window was covered in decorative stones. Every time Maribel or I stepped back there, they crunched underfoot. Someone was standing there now. I didn't scream. I didn't move. Some instinct told me that making noise would be a mistake. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it around myself, and stared at the frosted glass. At first, I saw nothing. Then a pale blue glow appeared at the bottom edge of the window. A phone screen. It hovered there for a few seconds, long enough for me to realize exactly what it was, before disappearing. Someone had been standing outside my bathroom window, and they had just checked their phone. My body went cold. I pressed myself against the wall, as far from the window as possible. My phone was still in the kitchen. The bathroom door didn't lock properly, something we'd complained about but never fixed. The stones crunched again. Then silence. I waited, counted in my head. 60 seconds. Then another 60. When I finally moved, I crept down the hallway in the dark, every floorboard sounding impossibly loud. I reached the kitchen and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. I whispered when the dispatcher answered. I told her someone was outside my house, that I'd seen a light at my bathroom window, that I thought I'd been followed home. She asked careful questions. Had I seen them clearly? Had they tried to enter the house? Was I somewhere safe? I think so, I said, even though I wasn't sure. 7 minutes passed before red and blue lights washed over my living room curtains. 2 officers arrived. They took me seriously. They searched the yard. They found footprints in the stones, a disturbed circle beneath my bathroom window. And near the fence line, half hidden by a bush, a cigarette butt, and a deep knee print in the dirt. Someone had been kneeling there, watching. The police never found out who it was. I stayed somewhere else for days. We added locks, lights, cameras. I still live in Austin. But every New Year's Eve, I leave town, because I know what it feels like to realize, with absolute certainty, that you are not alone. The New Year's Eve I'm about to talk about happened during one of the quietest phases of my life. Not quiet in a dramatic way. No heartbreak, no chaos, no big changes. Just routine. The kind of routine that convinces you nothing bad can happen, because nothing ever does. At the time, I was renting a small 2-story house on a residential block just outside Fort Collins, Colorado. The neighborhood was the kind people describe as peaceful. Tree-lined streets, sidewalks that curved gently instead of running straight. Houses spaced far enough apart that you didn't hear your neighbors arguing, but close enough that everyone recognized each other's cars. I worked long hours during the week and kept mostly to myself. My evenings were predictable. Dinner, television, maybe a book if I had the energy. That New Year's Eve, I didn't have plans. No parties, no countdown downtown. Just me, a couple of beers in the fridge, and a clear view of the street from my upstairs bedroom window. The plan was simple. Stay home. Watch fireworks from above. Go to sleep shortly after midnight. I'd lived on that block long enough to recognize every porch light, every mailbox, every familiar sound. That familiarity created a false sense of safety I didn't even realize I was relying on. As the evening settled in, the neighborhood began to change. Kids ran up and down the sidewalks, sparklers hissing in their hands. Fireworks started early, sharp cracks echoing between houses. The air already smelled like smoke before the sun fully set. It felt like one of those nights where nothing out of the ordinary could possibly happen. Around 10 p.m., I was in the kitchen rinsing out a glass when I noticed something small, but strange. Headlights slowed as they passed my house, not stopped, just slowed. Engines idled a second longer than necessary before continuing down the street. At first, I brushed it off. People were looking for parking, dropping someone off, turning around. Still, there was a pattern, the same hesitation, The same pause. I told myself I was overthinking it. Being alone has a way of doing that to you, especially when the night stretches out between bursts of noise. Closer to midnight, I went upstairs to my bedroom. The window faced the street, giving me a clear view of almost the entire block. Fireworks lit the sky in uneven bursts, red and green flashes bouncing off car roofs and windows. Neighbors drifted between houses, drinks in hand, voices carrying easily through the cold air. Somewhere down the block, music blasted from a speaker, distorting every time a firework exploded nearby. That's when I noticed it. A darker shape near the side of my house, close to where the fence met the detached garage. It wasn't obvious. Not a person standing in plain view. Just a place where the light didn't behave the same way. Like something was absorbing it instead of reflecting it. When the next firework went off, bright enough to flood the street with light, the shape was gone. Midnight arrived violently. Noise hit all at once. Cheering, horns, fireworks detonating so close together, it felt like pressure against my chest. The sky turned white for seconds at a time. Smoke drifted low between houses, swallowing porch lights and street lamps. I stayed at the window, watching sparks rain down. That's when I heard it. A dull, metallic scrape from downstairs. It was completely swallowed by the celebration outside. Too quiet to stand out. Too subtle to alarm anyone else. But it was wrong. I stood still, listening as the neighborhood screamed its way into the new year, unaware that something else was happening inside my house. When the outside noise dipped just enough for my ears to separate sounds again, I heard a faint click from downstairs. Not forceful, careful, like someone testing something gently. My heart started racing, but my body felt heavy, slow to respond. I stepped into the hallway and eased my bedroom door open, careful not to let the hinge complain. From the top of the stairs, I could see the front door area, lit only by flickers of fireworks sneaking through the curtains. Everything looked normal at first, but the air felt tight, pressurized. I crept down a few steps. That's when I noticed the front door handle. It was angled slightly downward, not fully at rest. That alone sent a surge of panic through me. I am obsessive about checking locks, especially on nights like that. I remember checking it twice before going upstairs. I stood there, counting my breaths, trying to decide if I was imagining things. Then I heard it again. A soft sound. Fabric brushing against wood near the doorframe. Whoever it was moved slowly, deliberately, counting on the fireworks to cover every mistake. Another explosion lit the street, and in that brief flash, I saw it. The outline of a shoulder pulling back from the door. I backed up instinctively. My foot brushed the stair rail, making a faint tap. For a split second, everything inside the house stopped. Outside, the celebration continued, but inside, there was absolute stillness. I stood frozen halfway between floors, barely breathing. Then the door handle returned to its normal position. Slow, careful, controlled. Moments later, light footsteps retreated across the porch. I rushed back upstairs, locked myself in the bedroom, and stood there with my phone clenched in my hand, staring at the door while fireworks tore the sky apart. The celebration felt mocking now. When dawn finally crept in, I forced myself to check the house. The front door had fresh scratches around the lock, thin lines that caught the light when I tilted my head just right. Outside, the fence gate was unlatched. Muddy shoe prints crossed my yard and vanished on the sidewalk. Later that morning, neighbors started talking. 3 houses on the block showed signs of attempted entry. all during the loudest moments of the night. Someone had moved methodically from house to house, using celebration as camouflage. I changed my locks that week, installed cameras, motion lights. Nothing else happened. But I learned something I won't forget. Noise doesn't just distract, it protects the wrong kind of patience. New Year's Eve has a way of making people careless. It wraps the city in noise and light and convinces everyone that danger has taken the night off. The year I'm talking about, I believe that too. Back then, I was living in downtown Portland, Oregon, in a third-floor apartment wedged between an old brick office building and a bakery that only opened in the mornings. I shared the place with two friends, Marcus and Devin. We were all in our late 20s, juggling long workdays, bad sleep schedules, and that quiet pressure to feel hopeful about the future. Life wasn't dramatic. It was predictable in the best and worst ways. That night, the city had shut down several streets for the New Year's celebration. Temporary stages were bolted together near Pioneer Square. Food trucks lined the blocks like metal animals, steaming grease and sugar into the cold air. Giant digital countdown clocks were strapped to streetlights, glowing red against the dark sky. We met up with a few friends, Jared and Nina, near the main stage. Nothing wild. Plastic cups of cheap beer, shouting over music, laughing at jokes that weren't that funny. The kind of night that feels safe because it's public. When midnight hit, fireworks erupted over the river, bright enough to turn the clouds silver. Strangers hugged. Someone spilled a drink down my jacket and apologized like we were old friends. For a few minutes, the world felt stitched together by noise. After the fireworks faded and the crowd started surging toward the main avenues, we made a decision that would stay with me longer than any resolution I ever made. Instead of waiting for rides or fighting traffic, we decided to walk home. Our apartment was only about 15 minutes away if we cut through a few quieter blocks. We'd done it before, plenty of times. The idea was simple. Avoid the chaos, get inside, crash. I remember feeling relaxed, slightly buzzed, ready for warmth and silence. That feeling didn't survive the first turn. The moment we left the main street, the city changed its voice. The music dulled into a distant thump, like a heartbeat heard through walls. Laughter thinned out, scattered instead of constant. The sidewalks were littered with confetti, crushed cups, and spent fireworks that still smelled faintly burned. Streetlights were farther apart here. Each one created its own lonely pool of yellow light, with darkness stretched thickly between them. Someone joked about how quiet it suddenly was. The laugh that followed came out a little too loud. That's when I noticed the movement. At first, it was just a reflection, something shifting in the dark glass of a closed storefront as we passed. Shapes that didn't belong to us. I told myself it was just other people heading home the same way. I didn't say anything. We stayed close together, our footsteps scraping softly against the pavement. I glanced back again, more deliberately this time. There were figures behind us, not close, not rushing, just there. At least 4 of them, maybe more, spaced out along the sidewalk. They moved at our pace, never gaining, never falling behind. When we slowed slightly, so did they. When we sped up, they adjusted without hesitation. That restraint set off something deep in my gut. I still didn't speak. I wanted proof before I infected everyone else with my fear. We crossed an intersection and took a sharper turn than necessary, the kind of turn that didn't make sense unless you knew the neighborhood. I listened carefully. A moment later, the footsteps behind us changed rhythm. They turned too. That was when Marcus leaned closer and whispered my name, his voice tight. "You see them, right?" The relief of not being alone in the fear lasted about half a second. After that, it curdled into something worse. We weren't imagining it. We weren't alone in the way we wanted to be. We picked up our pace, not running, just enough to test the situation. The figures responded immediately, maintaining the same measured distance. Still no voices, no laughter, no drunken stumbling, just intent. The buildings grew taller, older. Brick walls rose higher, windows fewer. The street narrowed, squeezing sound into a dull echo. The next pool of light looked thinner, weaker, like it couldn't quite hold back the dark. When we veered toward what should have led back to a busier road, the figures behind us shifted. They spread wider, not blocking us outright, just enough to make the message clear. Forward was allowed, sideways was not. That realization hit me harder than fear. It pressed down on my chest, heavy and suffocating. We weren't being chased, we were being guided. Every step after that carried weight. The silence between us thickened, broken only by uneven breathing and the soft, synchronized scuff of shoes behind us. Phones were out, screens dimmed instinctively, like light itself could betray us. I remember the smell more than anything else. Damp concrete, old trash, wet brick. My senses felt sharpened, overcorrecting, desperate to catch something useful. The figures stayed just far enough back to avoid direct light. Their faces never resolved into detail, outlines dissolving whenever I tried to focus. That distance felt intentional, like a loose leash. We reached a stretch where one of the streetlights flickered, buzzing faintly as if unsure it wanted to stay on. Someone muttered that this wasn't right, that we should cut through a small courtyard ahead to reach a more open block. The moment we slowed to change direction, the figure shifted again. Wider this time, edges of the street occupied, paths suggested without a word. "Keep moving." My mouth went dry. Every plan I tried to form collapsed before it could finish assembling. They didn't need speed or threats. Control came from certainty. I did something stupid then. Small, almost pathetic. I dropped my keys. They clattered loudly against the pavement, metal ringing in the quiet. I bent to pick them up slower than necessary, heart hammering. The idea was simple. See if they'd close in. They didn't. They stopped too. The space behind us froze into a terrible stillness. That pause was worse than movement. It felt like acknowledgement, like they understood exactly why I did it, and wanted me to know they were paying attention. When I straightened and started walking again, they followed. Perfect sync. It felt like the street itself had learned how to breathe behind us. We passed long stretches of blank walls, no windows at street level. Sound behaved strangely there, bouncing back distorted, making it hard to tell what was echo and what wasn't. My heart hammered so hard it felt visible, like it might show through my jacket. Devin whispered that we needed people. Light. Anything. Ahead, a narrow passage cut between two buildings. It wasn't ideal, but it was unpredictable. We turned into it all at once. For a split second, the footsteps behind us stopped. That absence was terrifying. It meant they were deciding. The passage was tighter than it looked. Brick walls boxed us in, trapping every sound. Our footsteps echoed back wrong, doubled, warped. About halfway through, the silence ended. Footsteps returned, closer. No more distance, no more patience. They had committed. Panic shifted into something colder, sharper, focused. I heard someone quietly crying, trying to keep it contained, and it made everything feel exposed. The passage opened into a small service road with a single working light buzzing overhead. In that harsh glow, I finally saw them more clearly, at least 5, dressed in layers that didn't stand out individually, but blended into a uniform of dark fabric. Faces angled just enough to avoid full view. One of them lifted a hand, not pointing, not waving. The others adjusted instantly. That gesture told me everything about how coordinated this was. We ran. The road sloped upward toward a block I recognized. Residential buildings, balconies, maybe someone awake. The figures followed, the gap shrinking. Footsteps finally honest about their intent. At the end of the block, a convenience store glowed like something unreal. Bright windows, fluorescent light. Safety made visible. We sprinted. Behind us, footsteps accelerated too. We burst into the light, nearly colliding with a couple outside the store. Breath ragged, words useless. The figures stopped at the edge of the glow. They didn't scatter. They didn't rush. They stepped back, melted into darker streets with the same discipline they'd shown all night. We stayed there a long time, shaking, explaining ourselves badly to confused strangers. We took the long way home after that. Busy roads, lights, noise. I still don't know who they were. But I know what they weren't. They weren't lost. They weren't drunk. They weren't curious. They knew exactly where they wanted us to go. And every New Year's since, when the city gets loud enough to hide anything, I remember how silence can be shaped, how streets can guide you,